Hey Mark, you there?
Oh, yeah. Hey, I
Hey.
had this in a tab. I completely forgot I was still on here.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was in another meeting and then I missed your message until just now. Um let's Hey, we've agreed to all the stuff that we needed to agree to. I'm Benji, you're Mark. Let's go. What are we talking about today?
Mostly, I was gonna try and sort of get an update from Lee on if there was anything else I needed to do because he gave me some action items for the um what should we call it, the schema coordinates, and I sent a bunch of sent a couple of PRs, but they've not been looked at. I think I just want to make sure there's nothing else because I know the like spec cut is coming, so just trying to close the loop on that. Um, it is also, I guess maybe I'll save it for another time. Wanted to chat a little bit about um, persisted operations, but this maybe doesn't feel like the right time for that. So, um, yeah, that was it. That
Okay.
was my agenda.
So on the schema coordinates front, I know that Lee is keen to try and get this into this cut of the spec. So I know that this is something that's still top of mind for him. I'm not sure if you need to do anything else on this. It looks like, all right, yeah, there was a bunch of approvals, and then someone kicked up a fuss, didn't they, Benji? But I think you're back into a good state again. Um, I believe is Lee the one writing the parser now, or did you have you had a go at
I
that?
I ended up being both. So I submitted a PR for a implementation change, is which is this one here, I think. Yeah, let me see if I can link it in this sidebar. Actually, Joey, I just saw Joey had left a message. Maybe I need to respond to this somehow. Push the spec forward on B2, bothered by the increase in size. Anyway, so there's like, okay, so maybe I'll look more at that. So there is a implementation change here. I found it tricky to do it in sort of the like super minimal isolated way as discussed in the last meeting where we talked about it, because the more of like starting with like a minimal um lexa, um yeah, starting with the minimal lexa, it turns out you need more and more of the logic in the like
Hmm.
original lexa. um so yeah, I ended up kind of carrying quite a lot of stuff over. um
I think the hope was like there's a lot of things that we don't need in this Lexa, right? So we don't need white space, we don't need comments, we don't need like ignored characters. Um,
yeah, it's
do we
less it's
need
like 100
notations?
lines. No, I well, so that's the thing. No, but then if you want to throw like a nice syntax error, then that kind of depends on needing positions.
Yeah, we ought to have them really.
And
Yeah.
so like to reuse that kind of thing, then you need. So I think I like zeroed out all of the positional stuff, or at least like the lines maybe. It's honestly it's been a while since I looked at this. I'm kind of refreshing my mind now. Um, yeah, so there is like some positional stuff in here, but that's mostly to like reuse the create token helper and syntax errors, and I think read name as well was like a big one. I think that was the one we wanted to reuse for sure, which needs a position. So anyway, like originally, like many decades ago when I first started this, I sort of tried doing like a we can do this with regex, or like dot, split, full stop. Like, we don't need a parser or Alexa or anything like that. And so I did try and like give a stab at that, which I link in the PR description, but it ends up being like really difficult actually. So yeah. Anyway, so that's the GraphQL JS implementation. Little hairy, but yeah. And then there's a spec change. Yeah, I think I just committed to because I'm the author of the original spec PR, so I was able to just push to that. So that's already been updated. So yeah.
Okay, I've just changed to doing a diff against the next branch, so I can see the final diff rather than the diff to the diff, as it were.
Right.
Yeah, and then I can see that you're doing like Lexa implements Lexa interface and things like that. That's neat. So the actual amount of added code isn't humongous.
Right.
The main thing is the pass schema coordinate. That's like main entry point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, create a source, create Lexa, pass, do the things. Yeah.
How are you seeing the like combined?
Yeah, it took me a moment to get it set up.
I need
Here's
the like
the
specific PR,
URL
I
in the chat.
guess. Yeah, I guess I just need the specific SHA, and I can view that. Okay. Yeah, that works here. Oh, well, maybe not, because I think that you're like creating a PR there.
I haven't actually created it. I just like scrolled down the page to look at the diff.
Oh, okay. Right. That works. I guess I should update that doc string on read next token. That's the only thing.
This looks quite neat to me, the JavaScript implementation. Is there a particular reason you've not just merged it straight in?
I don't have permissions for that. So Lee was the original author of the GraphQL JS spec. So I mean the original GraphQL JS PR, and so
Right.
this is my diff based on his diff. So I don't have permissions to merge it
Okay,
into
I
this diff.
recommend that
Yeah.
you open this as your own pull request directly to the next branch in GraphQL.js, and then comment at the bottom of Lee's pull request to say, here it is implemented with an independent Lexa.
Yeah, like should we close this PR and switch over to okay.
Essentially make that recommendation, and then Lee, when he comes to look at it, can either decide no, he's going to carry on with his own version and tidy it up, or he can decide, yeah, he'll go ahead. Actually,
Makes sense.
sorry, I'm just looking over this now. We already merged quite a lot of stuff on top of what Lee did, right?
Yeah. People
So
have
I
been
could
merging
just
with
merge
PRs in.
it. Could just merge it.
Right. I mean, if he changes his mind, we can sync it history, revert back.
Did he have a different parser?
It was, I don't remember what he originally did, but
Oh, no, he didn't have a different parser because what he did was he used the existing parser and just like allowed all of the spaces and stuff. And the main issue is we don't want to
right.
allow spaces.
It just didn't take the code path for schema coordinates, but it like technically could have.
Yeah. I'm gonna I'm
I
going to
mean,
ask for forgiveness from Lee. I'm just going to go ahead and merge your pull request into Lee's pull request.
yeah, I mean, like
Are
this
you?
was Lee's wishes, so I feel like this is not too subversive.
Yes, agreed. Okay. Are you happy with it in its current state, as far as you know?
I just noticed there's like a doc, like I in the doc string to read the pass the doc string to pass schema coordinates in parser.ts. I think is copied over and it talks about white space. So we need to update that. I think. Sorry, the
Okay.
Lexa, but I can. Where is it now? Bloody hell! I had it a second ago. Read next token. Okay, there it is. Sorry. Read next token in schema coordinate lex.ts talks about white space. I probably can update that right now real quick. And then we can mention it.
Okay, sounds good. I should reply to Yovi as well.
I'm just going to remove that stanza because it's not super complicated.
Okay, so Yovi seems to basically be saying, don't worry too much.
Yeah.
Which I think is reasonable.
Okay, I just updated that doc string, so I
I
think
see your commit, yeah.
that's good now.
Or more CI checks to wait for. Okay, and then on the spec front for it, what's the status there? Have you updated it to reflect what your latest
Yes,
implementation is?
I believe so. So essentially, I reverted to before we added the like triple dot versus single dot thing, and again, just implementing what the recommendations were from the spec meeting. So this is now just sort of purely an additive spec change. If you look, there are no deleted lines, no change lines in the spec.
Awesome, that's good.
And I added like a note to say this grammar is unique because schema coordinate may not include any other token. So it's, trying to be like its own thing.
Okay, that's really good. Okay, I need to like read over that carefully, which I'm not going to do right now. But yeah, this is promising. Let me just add that to my to-do list. I probably won't get around to it until next week. To be honest, no, I'm going to have to try and squeeze it in before GraphQL Conf, but it's going to be a struggle.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's been like several years since I've been to any conference really, pandemic and all that. But yeah, hopefully we get to meet each other. Should be cool.
Yes, it's going to be awesome. I love hanging out with all the GraphQL folks. So yeah, I'm really excited for it. Promises to be a good one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Let's just do a very quick one. So you were saying about persistent queries or persistent operations.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I'll shoot my shot. So there's a whole class of tooling there, which is sort of like there's an implied standard by the different vendors doing persistent operations, specifically like not automatic ones. I'm talking about like a you have a manifest file and all of that.
Yeah.
And people sometimes want to build additional tooling around the idea of like persistent query IDs. It's not actually necessarily specifically a vendor thing, right? Um,
Yep.
and we've already started to encode some standardization there in the over HTTP spec. I actually couldn't find, there was like a deleted file which talks about persistent queries, specifically in the context of how it's represented in the transport layer, but I can't seem to find that anymore. But anyway, so we're already starting to do that in the over HTTP spec. But there's a whole bunch of like questions and like things that I feel would benefit from maybe additional standardization. So the two things that spring to mind, number one is like how you should
Tell me.
well how you scan over and compute persisted queries within a code base, specifically in the context of monorepos. So like one of the
Oh,
open
interesting.
questions is like you want to guarantee uniqueness of query names. I mean, I have a whole thing of like query names aren't unique because like using
Hmm.
query names is kind of a bit dangerous for identification purposes because you might identify the wrong thing, either like an old version of the same query or just like another query that happens to be named the same thing in a
Yeah.
different platform repo. So like the iOS repo and the Android repo could have get business name, but totally different queries.
Yeah.
Apollo and vendors will guarantee query name uniqueness within a project, but a monorepo might have multiple projects. And so anyway, so saying something like query names, uh, yeah, translating from queries to persisted ID should be done like either within the context of a monorepo project or within the context of the monorepo as a whole, right? So that's like question number one: is there benefit in sort of official guidance there? And there's a whole class of tooling that we want to build around um, not persisted query IDs, but rather query names. But then we have this query uniqueness problem. So you can imagine if you're building like an alerting framework and you want to have a config file that says like, what are the thresholds for this query or something, right? You don't want to build that config file. The key for each query, it can't be operation ID because that's just going to create too much churn when you update the query. Team's always going to be like adding to that thing. We've had that feedback. They don't want to do that. They just want to put query name, but you can't put query name because of the non-uniqueness problem. And so that's kind of like where I get into this. Yeah, like put fully, what is it? Fully qualified operation name. I feel like that encapsulates a lot of standardization and answers a lot of questions that then would make it sort of yeah, like a lot of tooling, a lot of config files, a lot of things could then standardize around that. So I don't know if there's anything there, but that's sort of like the class of problems that I'm struggling with at the moment. Then if any of that
Let's
makes
talk
sense.
about this let's talk about this in person at GraphQL Conf. I think we could have an interesting discussion there. Um, as a first approximation, and like I'll be honest, I don't fully follow some of the things that you're saying there. Um, like for example, the query name isn't enough because when you change things, you want to know that you've changed this new version. But like that's what the hash is for. And anytime you change something, the hash should change.
Yeah,
But
but
there is some approximation there where like you should do a minified or a normalized version of it. So if you change comments, for example, a white space, it shouldn't necessarily get a new hash. Um, but one of the approaches that I've seen that may be interesting to you is the approach where when you build a version of your client, you don't generate, say, 200 trusted documents. You generate one trusted document that has every fragment and every operation that your current version of your client uses. So essentially, you have one hash then, which essentially represents this current release, 1.0.7 of your application. And then you just use the operation name as a string inside of that to say which thing to actually execute. And of course, because you're not sending the entire document over the wire, it's still perfectly efficient.
That is extremely interesting. Probably off the paved path of slightly of what the libraries and stuff today, like how they currently work that we use. But that's a super interesting idea. I guess that could work. I mean, there may still be like the uniqueness problem, especially between platforms, right? So I mean, if you just think of like the company-wide alerting config file for defining the error thresholds for a specific query, what do you want that key to look like? Do you want it to be query name or hash? There's like problems with both. Um,
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure that that's the, is that even the right threshold to be setting it at? Like, should it be based on the field, like the operation path, the field within the operation, rather than the entire operation document itself? Because the operation document is going to change so much over time. It's going to be really challenging to set up any kind of limits on that basis.
if you're
I would
if you're
assume.
if you're talking about like the huge mega, one document per, then yeah, like you wouldn't that wouldn't make sense. I agree. You'd want to use something like query name or path within that document. Um, the way that I've been able to sell thinking about GraphQL from a ops and alerting endpoint standpoint is um, documents essentially queries compile down to a REST endpoint URL, and so at that point it's normalized to the same as like a REST API operation. So a REST API operation is just the you know its name is the endpoint name or whatever, and then a GraphQL query would be the operation would be the query name, right, or the query
Mhm.
ID. Um, and so then a whole bunch of tooling and platforms and infra doesn't have to care if it's GraphQL or REST at that point, which is quite
Yeah.
nice. So we can build these
Okay.
unified.
I think I understand what your issue is now. You're essentially saying once we've turned these things into their own REST endpoints, then we
Right.
want to be able to set a bunch of standardized policies that say, hey, this one, we know roughly what this one does. So there should be a maximum limit of 2 per minute for this. And this one's fine. You can do this much more frequently. This one should only be once an hour or whatever. Um,
Right.
but the problem is over time, if your query names aren't unique across multiple applications, then suddenly like you're setting the wrong constraints or
Yeah, you
um,
need you need to like namespace the query to your application, to your repo, to your project within a monorepo, and that's essentially
mm,
what the my little RFC does. Is kind of set up this um, you know standard for doing that.
right.
And I wonder if like the open telemetry stack as well, how it overlaps with that. Um, and I guess that like approach is probably how I'm not working in a third party GraphQL company. I haven't spoken to as many companies using GraphQL as you have, so you probably have a better sense than me. But at least from the folks that I've spoken to, that seems to be like a very common pattern of everyone does persistent documents and they send like one document per um, send like lots of documents and basically just doing the Apollo thing, right?
Mm. This is interesting. I think it would make sense as its own like standalone document for people that are using um, trusted documents in this
Right.
specific way. And more specifically, what it really comes down to, right, is this concept of applying rules to those final documents. And I think that that's something that not necessarily everyone's going to do. Like many people might do this at the GraphQL layer instead, or they might just have general policies that they apply across all of their documents. So
Right.
there's a number of different ways of dealing with the various needs here. But
There's
for
just
people
like,
that are doing it your way, which makes sense, right? Like, because then you can leverage all of this existing tooling that exists outside of GraphQL.
yeah,
Um, it makes sense to have some kind of standard there, I think.
which is probably the more common case. And I just feel like since we're already talking about persistent documents in the, in one of the specs, there's sort of an implied draw the rest of the owl, which doesn't exist, which is like how you come up with those trusted documents, how you come up with those IDs, which isn't really elaborated on. It's just sort of like assume that somehow you've calculated these IDs. And uh, yeah, like I haven't got like a fully formed thought there yet, but like maybe there's some like guidance here which links back to this namespacing proposal that I have here, which some guidance to say that like query names should be unique within a project within a monorepo or across the whole monorepo. You know what I mean? Obviously, we can't guarantee it across every repo in the world, but like at least for your repo, you should guarantee uniqueness, like things like that. I don't know.
I
Um,
think what you actually want here is aliasing, and there's a few reasons for this. So the spec as it stands essentially says use SHA-256 hash or
yeah,
do your own thing, and like doing your own thing is fine. But if you use the SHA-256 hash, then you're gonna always get like the same document, even if it's in different versions of the same client or if it's in different projects, if it's the same document, it will get the same hash. And knowing that you've got the same document is going to be more efficient for your server because it can just reuse that logic. It can reuse the fact it's already passed it or it's already fetched it from the store or whatever. So
yeah,
what you have in your fully qualified
that's
thing is essentially an alias. It's saying this combination of things correlates with this specific SHA hash.
that's exactly right. Yeah, which is what people actually want to write in like a config file format. But then there's the sort of additional thing, which is you can also omit the version number because there's an implied kind of like way to calculate version numbers. Like you like no human ever says this is like the v6 of this query, but it is an implicit v6 of that query if you have 5 previous versions of that query in your database registered with the same name in the same project. And
Yeah.
so um, and so then you would omit that version number in your config file, and then you can update the query. It can get a new SHA. You can add or remove a field, like a very trivial minor change, but you don't have to update the config file, which is like the overwhelming feedback, like both inside and outside Yelp whenever I've talked about this, which is what people want. So like I'm kind of, I fought the good fight of being like, we should only use document IDs for several years at this point, and I feel like I'm losing the battle. So yeah.
This is really interesting. I think it needs a bit of deeper thought, certainly from my side. Um, one final thought on it for today is if you think of this in terms of the aliasing, where the document has its own hash, but there's many different aliases that can access it. It feels a bit weird that you might specify different rate limits or whatever for essentially the same document, but from different sources. But I think that that's not terrible. Like there are situations where you'd want to do that. Like maybe it's okay if it's queried a lot from your mobile app, but it shouldn't be queried so much from the website or whatever. So there are
It is,
situations like that.
yeah, you've immediately nailed in on a edge case here, which is that you can have the same document exist in 2 different clients named, if it's like byte for byte the same query in source code, then it's going to get the same hash which exists today. Right now we don't have to deal with this like aliasing problem because we just use document IDs. Like that's why we only use document IDs. But if we start
Mm.
doing something like this RFC, then yes, you're right. There is sort of an implicit a many to one mapping, which is something that needs elaborating on. So yeah, I haven't really thought about how to handle that. It would kind of be a shame, as you say, to have to add the like repository name as an input to the hashing function. That kind of feels gross. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good answer there. But
So my general feeling on trusted documents is you hash them and you like have an identifier for them based on that hash.
yeah,
But when you store them, you don't only want that information. You also want to know where it came from. So
yeah,
if, for example, later you have an error, knowing the hash is kind of useless to you. You want to know that this is from the 1.0.7 release of your Android app.
that's exactly
So
what we do. Yeah, we
yeah,
have that.
so you're always going to send that along anyway.
Well, maybe because the clients, there's like a Babel plugin. We don't do this yet, but we should do. But it's nice that the document ID, the is a pure function of the query itself and just a hash, because then you can do things like have a Babel transform to transform the source code to only send the document ID. But if it starts needing like the repository name and the all these other like meta bits of information to be able to compute the document hash, the trusted ID, then you can't do that as easily. So I don't know.
Yeah, I was still imagining that like the client most of the time would be sending the hash, but that the other info, yeah, but I see what you're saying because essentially you
In
want
order,
them to be fetching from specific endpoints and you want them to be matched on those endpoint patterns
well,
rather than
no, just in order for the client to send the hash, like as a developer, you write JavaScript or whatever, you write the query, but then I guess I'll talk about web here. You when you like run the build, you want the client to send document IDs instead. And so
yeah, so you can
through some
easily
build,
send like the SHA-256 hash, right? You could just send that. And then as a separate
yeah,
process, you could have the sending of the aliases to the back end where you say, hey, we are this release of this thing. Here's the hashes that we need, and you get like your version number or whatever as well, and that will get stored. And then theoretically, you could also do a system where you then have like a rules system where you say, hey, if it's this
yeah.
client or this thing, then these endpoints that are SHA-256 hashes, this set of them are going to be impacted by this set of rules. But I think there is complexity there.
Yeah,
Um,
feels like a set. I hear what you're saying. That makes sense. But yeah, I that does feel like a lot of moving
okay.
parts there. I don't know. Thanks so much for the discussion, Bench. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, we'll talk about it some more in a couple of weeks. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I would like to dig in a bit deeper.
Cool.
All right. Cheers, Mark.
See ya.
Cheerio.
Bye.
Bye.